Wednesday. Word. Wednesday. Word. Wednesday. Word. And we are live. What's going on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube Live? It is your man, Coach Rowe. I'd like to welcome you to the first row. Today is Wednesday. And if it is Wednesday, you should know what that means. It's time for the Wednesday word. That's Wednesday word. Jumping straight into it. Tonight's topic is, I have to get to my little clicker, sorry, is the hole in the bucket. As always, I like to share what I mean by my topic. What's going on, Bruce? What's going on, Casual? Appreciate you guys coming in. And big brother Almighty, Damian Rowe. I always like to share what I mean by my topic. So with the topic, the hole in the bucket, what do I mean by that topic? What I mean by the topic, the hole in the bucket, is simply how in life sometimes we attempt to fix issues without repairing the holes, or without repairing it. For me, metaphorically, the holes are without repairing the trauma that is causing said issue. Our life is basically the capacity, the bucket, that metaphorical bucket, and those holes are again those unaddressed traumas. So when we operate in this space with holes in our bucket or traumas in our life that are not resolved, it makes being efficient in life, and it makes sometimes just life overall very frustrating and very difficult to navigate. So tonight I have 3 tools that I'm going to share with you, plus a bonus tool that I'm going to share with you for the first row, that when it comes to the holes in the bucket. So let's jump straight into it. Tool number 1 when it comes to the hole in the bucket is stabilizing is not enough. Now, when I initially started thinking about this particular topic, one of the things that came to my mind, and this was more so in regards to myself as a man, but kind of like an observation of men in general, and then a deeper observation of people in general, was that often we are all pretty good at stabilizing, self-regulation, for lack of better terms. We are good at saying there's some kind of trauma that we've experienced. Our mind is good at kind of blocking that trauma out so that we can continue to function. Sometimes we're good at just saying, okay, well, we're just going to continue to move forward, and we ignore it. But we're good at stabilizing and then moving forward. The problem is that oftentimes, I could at least say for myself, oftentimes in those spaces in my life where I have stabilized, that was where I stopped. That is where I said, okay, I've experienced this trauma. My parents used to fight physically. I experienced this trauma, and so I'm going to stabilize. And the stabilization that I used was having temper tantrums and getting into fights. And that was the stabilizing agent that I used. And I stopped at that as a child, which is acceptable because you're a child and your critical thinking isn't even fully developed. But I stopped at that. And the problem is I stopped, and that was the stabilization that I utilized to deal with that trauma for years. When I say years, I mean years, like into my 30s types of years. And so in the aspect of the bucket, or the holes that we have in our bucket, or the traumas that we have in our lives, stabilizing is just not enough. This past weekend, my wife and I were taking a trip. We went down to southern Utah, and along the road, we hit a rock. We had to pull over, change the tire, use the spare. And I don't know if you, depending on if you ever changed your tire before, or if you have a full-size tire or a donut, which is what we had in this particular vehicle, a donut tire. There's certain things that you can't do on a donut tire that you can do on a standard size tire. And so I was thinking about this trip that we were taking, and how we hit this rock probably like maybe an hour into our trip, and we still had an hour and a half of driving left to do. I'm sorry, 2.5 hours of driving left to do. And so we're on this donut, and number one, I can only go like 55 to 60 miles an hour, really 55 miles an hour. That's number one. The car is stable at that speed with the donut on it. But if I want to go 70, or in the spaces where the speed limit is 80, not breaking the law, but the speed limit is 80, if I want to go that fast, I'm not going to be able to do that on a donut. And so this is why stabilizing when it comes to our life and traumas is not enough. So what we ended up doing is we stopped at a tire shop, got a new tire, replaced the tire that had blown out, put that new tire back on. Now we have addressed the issue, and now we can move forward at the rate of speed that really is the speed that we should be driving at. And when I start thinking about how that relates to our stabilization, when we stabilize, yeah, we have that donut on. Me throwing temper tantrums was the equivalent of putting a donut on my life and saying, okay, I now have a means to still travel with this trauma and still progress with this trauma, but it slowed me down in so many areas in my life. And what ended up overall happening with that trauma in tow on a spare tire is eventually I went beyond the speed that tire was capable of handling, what that stabilization was capable of handling, and all of a sudden I now go from having a blowout and a donut to having a total car accident. And that's what my life ended up with, because I chose in that infancy to stick in my infancy of problem resolution. I chose to stick with that stabilization. Now, I'm not saying that stabilization is not important. Stabilization is absolutely important, but it is only one part of probably like a 5 to 10 step process. So I think about the story. I can never remember this guy's name. I don't know why I can't remember his name, but it's the hiker who was out hiking on the trail. He didn't tell really anybody where he was going. Basically, a boulder fell on his arm. He had to cut his arm off to get from under the boulder and get to safety. I think about this because there's some aspects of things that take place in that situation. Number one, before stabilization comes disinfecting. And disinfecting, when it relates to trauma, is really a sense of acknowledging the trauma. It's hard to stabilize something if you're not willing to acknowledge it. It's no different than him having to, cut off his arm. He's like, yo, I got to do what I can to disinfect this knife, or do what I can to keep this area clean, because the last thing I want to do is cut off my arm and then die because my arm is infected. But that's the first area of before stabilization, is disinfecting, which is acknowledgement of actual trauma. Once you acknowledge the trauma, then you can have a good idea of what you need to do to stabilize. Because I told you, again, stabilization is a very important part of handling life traumas. So then once you stabilize, now that you're stabilized, you get to the place that you need to get the help that you need, whether that's therapy, whether that's counseling, whether that's, the great outdoors, whether that's solitude or a resort, whatever that may be. You get to that place, and that's when you begin the repair process. The problem with stabilization is it is a temporary fix. It is designed to get you only so far. It'd be like your bike falling apart and you saying, okay, the screw broke, I'm gonna put some duct tape here and that's gonna hold the tire on. But you're not gonna always ride your bike like that. I actually had a bike snap in half when we were riding it when we were kids, because we just tried to stabilize it. Okay, well, it's not as broke. No, it was broke. And then eventually when we were riding it, it broke all the way. But after you get past that disinfection, that stabilization, and you're in the repair, that's not even the end. It's almost like if you go to the doctor and you get surgery. Yeah, man, they're going to repair your broken arm. Your broken arm is repaired. Great. Well, there's still a healing process that comes after that. And really, that's why stabilization or stabilizing ourselves is not enough, because there's so many different things that take place in order to fully resolve trauma, so that we can actually get to the levels in life that we want to be in. And I don't mean levels like, oh, your lifestyles of the rich and famous. I just mean levels of emotional maturity, emotional stability, mental peace, mental calm. That's what I mean when I say the levels that we want to get to. So I know it's a whole lot. It's a whole lot. But at the end of the day, stabilizing is not enough. It is a part of the process, but please, 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 my recommendation is that you move through the entirety of the process and don't handicap or cripple yourself with stabilization and just staying with the stabilization efforts. So that's tool number one when it comes to the hole in the bucket. Tool number two when it comes to the hole in the bucket is complaining does not repair holes. Complaining about trauma does not repair trauma. I always, and especially with the visual that I use for this particular show, with the bucket with holes in it, I always think about the walk from the stream back to the village, and you have this bucket with holes in it. Complaining about that bucket with holes in it is not going to repair a single hole in that bucket. Man, every time I go to this stream, I only come back with half a bucket of water because there's a hole in the middle of the bucket. That's not going to fix the hole in the bucket. Complaining actually, in many cases, especially when it comes to trauma, complaining without addressing the actual trauma, what ends up happening is that trauma hole gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, because what it does is it initially or eventually impacts so many different relationships in your life. And then once you impact those relationships, what it begins to also do is it begins to start giving you these thoughts about who you are as a person. And it may not be who you are as a person, but you'll complain and you'll complain, and then you become what? There's a reason why this is in this word. You become complacent, and you stay in the same area. So, I mean, I can have a bucket with holes in it, scoop up a bucket of water out of the stream, and then just stand there and be like, man, it still has a hole in it. The whole time I'm complaining about the hole that this bucket has in it, water is coming out of the bucket. I remember in California a couple years back, there was a dam that breached. I forget what the name of the dam was, but there was a dam that had a breach in it, and it's because the structure was no longer sound, had a whole bunch of micro fractures in it, and eventually it gave way. Complaining about traumas is like having a dam that's holding back so many things that you haven't addressed. And eventually all it takes is one more drop of trauma before that dam breaches and overflows and floods your life. Holes will become bigger the more we complain about them, because they will never be addressed, they will never be mended, they will never be repaired. And so this tool is really for me about being able to not only stabilize ourselves, but being able to say, okay, I'm stable, but I'm not going to allow the complaints that I have, even in the stability that I've created, to keep me from working on me, to keep me from working on traumas that I have, that I've been holding on to, that I know I haven't resolved. So complaining is never going to get you the result of patching up or fixing your bucket. The only thing that's going to get you to do that is the work. And complaining is not work. It's actually, if it was work, it would be considered non-productive work, because you do have to put some energy out to complain. But if you're not doing anything, you're not doing the work to repair. So that's tool number 2 when it comes to the hole in the bucket. And then finally, tool number 3 when it comes to the hole in the bucket is it's easier to fix empty buckets. It's easier to fix empty buckets. And this tool really uh, became important to me and the traumas that I've faced, because when you have a backlog of traumas, it's really hard to get focused on the new traumas that are coming. So you just kind of just continue to add to the backlog, and eventually nothing gets addressed. But empty buckets are easier to fix. And the reason they're easier to fix is because you're not divided between filling the bucket and repairing the bucket. Think about, again, if you have a bucket with water coming out of it and you're trying to put something that needs time to dry, or something that needs time to adhere to seal that hole. If you're not, if your bucket is full, it's kind of hard to do that, because water is going to continue to push throughout that bowl. I remember when we went, I think, yeah, it was last year. We went to Hoover Dam, and Hoover Dam, for those who are not familiar with that dam, that is the dam that they used uh, to create hydroelectricity from the Colorado River, and it also creates the reservoir for Lake Mead. And when I was looking at the history of how they built Hoover Dam, you got to imagine, at the time, Colorado River is just flowing, water's just flowing and flowing and flowing. The way they actually were able to build the dam is they had to create a bypass. What they did is they drilled into the walls and drilled around to make basically this dry area that they could actually patch up, and then have the water go into the bypass and come out on the other side. The reason they did that is because without doing that, it would be impossible to try to build a dam, with especially a dam that had integrity um, in the current of the river. And so the reason I say the empty buckets are easier, it's easier, I'm sorry, to fix an empty bucket, or mend or repair an empty bucket, is because oftentimes you see this in relationships, we see this in jobs, we see this with people's, professions, we see this in many different areas. Oftentimes we try to fix our bucket in the midst of our bucket trying to hold on to something. I've seen this in relationships very, very frequently, where a person will be in a relationship and they will realize that that relationship is not the relationship that they want to be in. They'll complain. Tool number two, they'll complain, but they won't make any repairs. And then they get to this point where they're like, okay, I'm done with the relationship. And instead of simply ending the relationship, what they do is they go out looking for their next relationship that they can get into, instead of allowing the relationship that they're in to come to an end, which would allow their bucket to be empty. That relationship would flow out and it would give you the opportunity to work on yourself mentally, emotionally, maybe financially, depending on what that relationship was like, physically. It'll give you the opportunity to work on yourself without having to worry about somebody dumping more water in your bucket. It also happens financially, where I've been, this is part of the story for the night, but I've been a person where I knew my credit was bad, and yet I would still go to a retail store and they say, hey, we'll give you 10% off or 20% off if you apply for our card. I know I'm going to get denied, but I'm going to apply anyway. How are you going to fix your credit and get your credit score to go up if you're constantly applying to these cards that you know you're going to be denied? And that's going to have an impact on your credit. So that's why it's easier to fix empty buckets. It's easier to just allow, if a bucket is so severely damaged, if there's so much trauma that you have that you need to work on. Number one, I'm going to recommend don't work on that alone. But number two, when you go to work on that, if you have a bucket that's empty, don't be in such a rush to fill it back up so that it can flow out through those trauma holes. Give yourself the opportunity to take that moment that you have when there's nothing in your bucket to actually flip your bucket over and begin to mend that bucket. And then lastly, I thought that was the last tool, but I forgot. I told you guys I had a bonus tool tonight. The bonus tool for tonight is inspect your bucket frequently. Um, whether your bucket is full, overflowing, things are going good, things are going bad, inspect your bucket frequently. Inspect your life frequently for not only traumas, but for everything. Because when we regularly look at something, think about your car. You regularly take it in and it's regularly checked up. They can tell you, hey, you have an oil leak somewhere and that needs to be addressed long before your oil leak becomes horrible and then your engine locks up because your oil leaked all out of your car. Inspect your bucket frequently, inspect your life frequently for trauma, for successes, for anything that you feel is relevant to your journey. And the things that you want to bring into your bucket when you take those moments of inspection, if you find that there's something that creates holes, whether that's abusive relationships or just financial turmoil, whatever it may be, if you find that there's something that literally busts out the bottom of your bucket every time you put it in your bucket, stop doing that. Inspect your bucket, see what its capacity is, see what its capabilities are. And then if there's something that you want that you feel like it can't hold at this time, then strengthen your bucket so that way it'll be capable of holding it at some point in the future. But those are the three tools plus the bonus tool that I have for you this evening when it comes to the holes in the bucket. Really quick to go over these tools one more time. The very first tool when it comes to the hole in the bucket is stabilizing is not enough. It is never going to be enough. Our goal is to heal, and stabilization is a step in that healing process, but it is not the finality. It is not the finale of the process. Tool number two is complaining does not repair holes. Complaining again is a non-productive action. It's not only a non-productive action, it's a non-productive action that does not address holy bucket issues. And I don't mean holy is holier than thou. I mean you got holes in them. So complaining does not repair holes. Make sure that you are taking the steps to actually rectify and solve the problems that traumas, unaddressed traumas, may be causing in your life, rather than just complaining about them and becoming complacent within them. And then tool number three is it is easier to fix empty buckets when you have the opportunity. if you're given the opportunity, I think this is the way to say it. If you're given the opportunity to have an empty bucket, take that opportunity to fix your bucket, because that's at the point where you're able to turn it upside down, turn it all around, and actually do some significant work in creating the progress that you would need to create to gain healing. And then lastly, do not forget, at any time that you can, inspect your bucket frequently and often. So that's what I have for you guys this evening. As always, with the Wednesday Word, there is a story, something that kind of got me thinking about this particular topic. And for some reason, I think it's probably because I do financial content now, but this topic for me really comes down to the ebbs and flows. And I call it my credit ebbs and flows. Um, because there was a trauma that had taken place in my life. Um, and trauma has this interesting thing. It does this interesting thing, I think, to our psyche, is that we can experience a trauma and then try to move on from it, but still hold on to it in a way that we feel like it's probably never going to get any better. And there's this space between the trauma happening to where we feel like it's never going to get any better. And right on the other side, when we feel like it's never going to get any better, is hopelessness. And I've had hopelessness in many areas besides finances, but this particular story is about finances and my credit ebbs and flows. And I remember when I purchased my house in California, and I remember all the work that I had to do to get my credit score to where it needed to be, to have the money on hand to get the house. I remember all these things taking place, right? And here's the wild part. What I didn't realize is all the work that I had to do in order to purchase a house, all I was doing was stabilizing. All I was doing was, okay, I have a goal. My goal is to buy a house. My credit needs to be at around here to do so. So I started focusing on all the work to get my credit to where it needed to be. And I became very objective oriented. Um, the problem was, is once I achieved the objective, that stabilization that I did to get myself and get my credit to where it needed to be, it was like, hey, I don't need to be stabilized anymore. And my tire blew out. And so I went from bad credit to okay credit to okay-ish credit, I guess, to okay credit. And then I got the house. And then all of a sudden, the spending habits that caused bad credit to take place in the first place came right back. Why? Because I had obtained the objective that was the glue holding together my stabilization. And once that objective was met, it was no longer glue to keep me from doing whatever it was that was going to hurt my credit. And so I went from home ownership and going on a track to good credit to back to bad credit. And it was like, how does this happen? Why is this happening? And so in the reflection, because I mean, I complained about it, I'm not going to lie, I complained about it. But in the reflection period is where, when my credit was bad and it was like, okay, well, your credit is bad at this point, there's nothing you can do. That's where I began to repair my bucket. That's where I began to say, okay, what is it about credit that I am, what is this trauma behind credit that I am, just the moment I have it and can get things, I want to get the things that I can't afford. Honestly, that's what I can't afford. And really what it came down to was feeling, not that I necessarily was, but feeling like I grew up in an environment of financial lack. Not that I truly was. My parents provided for me, I would say, adequately. Um, but when you start looking at other people's families, and it was like computers, for instance, computers came out and it was like, I got friends who have computers with video games on it, and I don't have a computer that has video games like that because we can't afford it. And so you get this trauma and you get this behavior and this pattern of, well, I want it, I'm going to go and buy it. I want it, I'm going to go and buy it. I want it, I'm going to go and buy it. And that created these ebbs and flows, because all I would do is say, okay, I'm tired of not being able to get a credit card. Let me behave appropriately so I can get a credit card. And that would stabilize me and get me to the place where I can get a credit card. But the trauma still had not been addressed. What would have been more beneficial to me, and probably more beneficial long term for my future, would have been to say, okay, I want to stabilize to get my credit to where I want it to be. But I also need to address the traumas and the spending habits that I have that are causing me to continue to slide back down this hill once I get to the top of it. And because I didn't do so, because I was more so just kind of like, bad credit, whatever. I guess I'm gonna have to wait 7 more years to get my credit right. Because that was the path that I took for a very long time, for a couple of laps around 7 years. Um, my credit suffered significantly. But because of now, I understand that, and I moved beyond just stabilization when it came to my credit. Now I'm meticulous about my credit. Like, I'm meticulous to the point where I'm like, hey, I don't want that statement to close with that balance on it. Let's pay it off. I don't want that statement to be above 5%. Let's pay it down. Like, those are the things that I look at now with my credit, because I understand, hey, the trauma was is you felt like you didn't have things. And so now when you have the opportunity to get things, you just go and grab them. I don't have that trauma anymore because I realize the balance that I need to have within my budget. And I realize, honestly, that there's really nothing that I want that I can't have. It's just a matter of learning the discipline, for me, of delayed gratification. And this is all in a part for me about understanding not just what bucket I want my life to be, or what capacity I want my life to be able to take, but what holes I am willing to repair within my own life. And so that's really what tonight's topic is about. Like I said the hole in the bucket, but really it's the traumas that we have in our life. And as we continue to address those traumas, as we continue to move through the healing process, not just the stabilization process, we can truly repair those holes and make a structure that's even stronger than when the hole was when the bucket was initially intact, because you can add different materials that are stronger than what the bucket initially was. But that's what I have for you guys tonight. I appreciate you guys rocking with me on the first row. Again, Brother Damien, thank you. I appreciate you. Brother Bruce, Casual, and anybody else who's watching via the live. I definitely appreciate you guys tuning in. Jose, I see you're here from Facebook. So I just appreciate you guys taking the time to rock with me on this Wednesday. For those men who are here watching live, if you did not catch yesterday's men's circle, go back, catch that replay. It was on Measuring Success, an amazing show. That is going to be super therapeutic for us as men, and I'm enjoying creating that space for us. That's number one. And the show will actually, I keep realizing I don't say this, the show will actually air every other Tuesday. So the next time that the show will air will be on April 25th. Tuesday, April 25th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Other than that, I don't have any other shows this week for the first row, but you can catch me next week on Wednesday for another Wednesday Word. This is season 4, I believe. Yeah, season 4 for the Wednesday Word. And we have a couple more seasons to go before we hit the end of the year. But as always, I definitely appreciate you guys rocking with me live. If you like this video, please share it. If you share it, please like it. I'm happy to engage with you in the live chat. I'm happy to engage with you in the comments up to the first 7 days that the content is out. After that, we move on to new content. But until the next time, one love, peace, and God bless. Thanks for sitting on the first row.